1911, the Supreme Court of the United States decided that one company had become too powerful to be allowed to exist. So they cut it up into 34 pieces. It was the most aggressive thing the American government had ever done to a private business, and it was aimed squarely at one man. His name was John Davison Rockefeller. Here is what happened next. Each of those 34 pieces went off and became a company in its own right. And because he had owned a quarter of the original, he now owned a quarter of every single one of them. Within about a year, those pieces were together, worth roughly twice what the whole thing had been worth before it was cut up. The most famous act of trust-busting in history made its target substantially richer, and the companies that swam away are ones you have heard of: Exxon, Mobil, Chevron, Amoco, Conoco. You have almost certainly put fuel from one of them into a car. So how does one man end up owning 9/10 of an entire industry? The answer is not what people assume, and it is much cleverer. Everybody thinks Rockefeller owned oil wells. For most of the period that made him rich, he did not. He looked at the oil business in its early years and noticed something everybody else missed. Drilling was a lottery. You sink an enormous amount of money into a hole, and either something comes out or it does not, and nobody can reliably tell you which in advance. Worse, when somebody did strike oil, the price collapsed because suddenly there was too much of it. So drilling was a business where success and failure both hurt you. Rockefeller went one step downstream and bought the refineries instead. Crude oil out of the ground is not useful. It has to be processed before it becomes the thing people actually pay for, which at the time was kerosene for lamps. And the number of refineries was much smaller than the number of wells, which meant that if you owned the refining, you did not need to own a single well. Every driller in America had to come to you. That is the whole idea. He did not compete in the lottery. He bought the place where every lottery ticket had to be cashed. Once he had decided that, he moved with a speed that is still startling. In 1872, in the city of Cleveland, there were 26 refineries. Rockefeller owned one of them. Over roughly 3 months, he acquired 22 of the other 25. The way it worked was this. He would go to a rival owner, show him Standard Oil's actual books, and let him see the scale and the cost advantage he was up against. Then, he would offer a choice. Take cash and leave, or take shares in Standard Oil and come along. And then, he would point out, entirely accurately, that the alternative was to keep competing until there was nothing left to sell. Some of them took the shares and became extremely rich. Several who took the cash spent the rest of their lives saying they had been robbed. Both of those things are true, and the story usually only tells you one of them. By 1880, Standard Oil is generally reckoned to have controlled around 90% of American refining. Now the part that genuinely stops people, and it is the reason the laws changed. Oil has to move. In the 1870s, oil moved by railway. Rockefeller was by far the largest customer any of those railways had. He shipped enormous, steady, predictable volumes, which meant the railways competed for his business rather than the other way round. So he negotiated a discount. That is called a rebate, and while it was hardly fair, it is at least recognizable. Big customers get better prices. That happens today. Then he negotiated the second thing. The railways agreed that when a competitor of Standard Oil shipped oil, part of what that competitor paid would be handed over to Standard Oil. Read that again slowly. Every barrel his rivals shipped earned him money. Not a smaller share of the market. Not a competitive disadvantage for them. An actual payment from their pocket to his for the privilege of trying to compete with him. That was called a drawback, and when it became public, it caused a genuine national scandal. It is difficult to design a system more perfectly guaranteed to end in a monopoly. Standard Oil was not brought down by a politician or a rival. It was brought down by a journalist, and her motive was personal. Her name was Ida Tarbell, and her father had been an independent oilman in Pennsylvania. His business did not survive Standard Oil's expansion. She grew up watching what it did to her town. Then she spent years going through the records, court testimony, company documents, interviews, shipping arrangements, and between 1902 and 1904, she published it in a magazine in 19 parts. It was not a rant. That is exactly why it worked. It was carefully sourced, painstakingly specific, and it laid out the rebates and the drawbacks and the acquisitions in an order that made the pattern impossible to miss. It is generally regarded as one of the finest pieces of investigative journalism ever produced, and it did something that a decade of political speeches had not managed. It made the case boring and factual and undeniable. Rockefeller's response was to refuse to respond. He referred to her privately in dismissive terms and said nothing publicly at all. 7 years later, the Supreme Court cut his company into 34 pieces. So we arrive back where we started. In 1911, the court ruled that Standard Oil was an illegal monopoly and ordered it dissolved into 34 separate companies. And here is why it backfired, and the mechanism is beautifully simple once you see it. Standard Oil had been valued as one enormous, slow, politically toxic company that everybody was trying to sue. The 34 pieces were valued as 34 separate businesses in a growing industry. Each was now free to expand into areas the parent had been blocked from, and none of them carried the legal risk of being the most hated company in America. And the timing was extraordinary luck. 1911 is roughly the moment the motor car stopped being a toy for rich men and started becoming a mass product. Standard Oil had been built to sell kerosene for lamps. The thing that had previously been treated as an annoying byproduct of refining and sometimes just poured away was petrol. So the pieces were cut loose precisely as demand for the thing they made was about to go vertical. Rockefeller owned about a quarter of all of it. Within roughly a year, the combined value of the pieces is generally reported to have about doubled. His personal fortune peaked a couple of years later at something in the region of $900 million, at a time when the entire American economy was a fraction of its present size. Measured against the size of the country around him, he is usually described as the wealthiest American who has ever lived. So let me put the question to you here, because I do not think the answer is obvious. Was breaking up Standard Oil a failure, given that it made him richer, or a success, given that the industry got competition back? Tell me in the comments. And be specific, because those are two different questions and people keep answering the wrong one. Now the other side right. I have spent 10 minutes describing a man taking an industry apart. Let me make the other case properly, because it is stronger than most people expect. 1. He made the product dramatically cheaper, and that mattered enormously. Before mass refining, lighting a house after dark meant candles or whale oil, and both were expensive. Kerosene put reliable light into ordinary homes, and the price fell steeply through exactly the period Standard Oil dominated. Some of that was efficiency of scale that only a giant could achieve. He was ruthless, and he was also genuinely, obsessively good at reducing waste. He found uses for byproducts that his rivals threw away. 2. The chaos he replaced was real. Before the one big fish, the pond was 100 small fish starving each other. The early oil industry was booms, busts, and ruin, with prices swinging so violently that sensible businesses could not survive. His argument, which he made his whole life, was that he brought order to something destroying itself. You do not have to accept that argument. But it is not nothing, and the people who took his shares, instead of his cash, did very well. 3. He gave away an enormous proportion of it, and it bought real things. He gave away something in the region of $500 million over his lifetime, which was a colossal share of what he had. He founded a university. He funded a medical research institute. His foundation funded the campaign that pushed hookworm out of the American South, a disease that was quietly wrecking the health of millions of poor people. It funded the work that produced the yellow fever vaccine, which won a Nobel Prize and has saved an enormous number of lives. 4. And the uncomfortable part, which the channel is not going to skip. Some of that giving was a deliberate campaign to repair his reputation. He hired one of the first modern public relations men to do exactly that. The famous business of handing out coins to strangers was image management, and it worked. So both things are true at once, and you have to hold them together. The money was extracted through methods that a whole country decided were unacceptable, and it went on to eradicate a disease. Neither of those cancels the other out. What it actually tells you: 3 things, and every one of them is still live today. 1. The money is rarely in the thing itself. It is in the step everyone else treats as boring. He did not want the oil. He wanted the refinery. Nobody in the industry thought the boring middle bit was where the power was, and that is exactly why it was available. Ask that question about any industry you look at. Not who makes the thing. Who owns the part everybody has to pass through. 2. Being broken up is not the same as being defeated. The court got what it asked for. Standard Oil ceased to exist. Competition returned to American oil, and that was real. But breaking a company is not the same as breaking a fortune, because a fortune is ownership, and ownership survives reorganization. If you own a quarter of one thing, and that thing becomes 34 things, you own a quarter of 34 things. 3. Somebody is always writing it down. Rockefeller ignored Ida Tarbell for years, and reasonably so. She had no power, no office, and no legal authority. She had a stack of documents, and the patience to read all of them. It took her about 2 years to write, and about 7 more to work. And that is the part I would keep out of the whole story. Not the monopoly, and not the fortune, and not even the strange fact that cutting it up made it bigger. Just that the thing which finally moved a company that size was somebody sitting down and carefully checking the paperwork. Outro next. The family that was richer than Rockefeller 2 generations earlier built the biggest houses in America and had nothing left by 1973. Subscribe. I will keep drawing them small.